Thank you very much, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. It's wonderful to be back in Europe House. This is the first time I've been back to Europe House since not only Brexit, but also COVID. The last time I was here, last time I was outside was actually on the very evening of the day that we left the European Union. There was a series of events, and it was all very moving, of course. But today, we're not here to reminisce about the past. We're here to think about the future. And the future where the European Union could look very, very different than it does today. We're here to launch this wonderful book by my esteemed colleague from Alliance for Europe as well, Yannis Karamatsios. And he has written a fantastic book, Time for European Federation. I cannot recommend it enough. It's written for everybody. It's no longer this aloof topic that nobody could understand. It's written in plain, simple English, and I congratulate Yannis for finally writing a European federalism topic book. That's something we can all understand. The panelists today, of course, we have Yannis himself, the author. We have Roberto, who's a PhD student at the University Exeter studying European politics. We have Dirk Hazel from the Federal Trust, and a few other sort of pro-European organisations dotted around the UK. And finally, we have Lea Rattei, who is a member of the Young European Movement in Edinburgh, plus a few more organisations on top of that, as is traditional. I'm going to let Yannis explain the book, and I'm sure you'll be fascinated. We'll follow that up with a reaction from each of the panelists, and then the floor will be open to all of you, and you can ask some interesting and insightful questions. Again, for the camera, if you could speak up and be loud. If you don't want to be filmed, please don't ask a question because we can't stop and start the stream, I'm afraid. But if you do want to ask a question, you don't want to be filmed, we'll have a drinks reception afterwards. And you can ask your questions then. Yannis will be more than happy to speak a bit more about it. So without further ado, I will let Yannis take the floor. And please tell us more about the book.
Thank you, Alex, for the invitation. Thanks to YEM for the invitation too. I appreciate it a lot. It's the first time I will present this book. It's the first of a series of events all over Europe. And I'm very excited to do so. And I'm very excited to start here in London for obvious reasons. The post-Brexit London that really broke our heart in Brussels and elsewhere in Europe. So I come from Greece. I'm a lawyer from Greece, but since 2006, I work in the European Commission as legal officer. At the same time, I'm a member of several federalist organizations. I'm founding member of Alliance for Europe. It's a pro-European organization campaigning for European values and unity. I'm also a member of UF, the Union of European Federalists in Brussels. And I'm author of this book. Why I started writing this book? Everything started almost 10 years ago in the crisis of 2010 to 2015, where we had a series of financial and debt crisis in Europe. And in the center of that crisis was my country, Greece. And in 2015, maybe most of you don't remember it, but my country was facing the famous Brexit that, thank God, didn't happen, because last minute we decided to stay in the Eurozone and comply with the tough austerity rules. So the idea of exit first appeared with Greece, with Brexit. It didn't work. Unfortunately, it worked 1 year later, in 2016, with the United Kingdom. And then we realized, not only me, but also several colleagues of mine, that several things don't work well anymore in the European Union. We are still an incomplete union, and this is why we have had those crises that we have had. To give you some examples, we have a common monetary union, for instance, the euro, but it's not applicable all over the EU. Only 19 member states out of the 27 have adopted the euro. At the same time, we do not have a fiscal union. So we have a common currency, but we have different fiscal rules. Every country has different deficits, different debts, different economic development. That makes the whole system very incoherent and very dysfunctional. We have the Schengen zone where people can move freely within the Schengen, but at the same time, we don't have a common immigration or asylum policy. So yes, we have Schengen on one hand. On the other hand, some people cannot move freely within this zone because they are asylum seekers or immigrants, or during the COVID times, they might come from the wrong state that has a high level of infection, because we also had the Schengen crisis in the first months of the pandemic. And of course, we still have strong defense, for instance, high budgets, military budgets per member state, but altogether, nothing in common. So we are, let's say, 56%, 60% a federalized union for the time being, but you can feel the weakness of the system, especially in times like this when we have this war in Ukraine and Europe having an economy 10 times bigger than the economy of Russia, population 3 times bigger than the population of Russia, and still is a geopolitical dwarf compared to a giant like Russia. This is not normal. This is not, let's say, natural in the global order. So we started drafting our ideas at the beginning as a manifesto of a few pages of what should be done in order to reach the level of a federal Europe. But the more we were writing, the more we realized that we need to elaborate more on specific policies. We need to put some flesh on the bone. Not just the idea that Europe needs to become, let's say, a sovereign federal state, but also what kind of direction should it follow throughout the century. So this short manifesto became this book. It's a book of 270 pages, which starts with the premise that right now Europe is facing 5 existential challenges for the rest of the century. Some challenges are compared to the rest of the world. Some challenges are challenges that the whole world is facing. These 5 challenges are: first, we are in economic decline compared to the rest of the world. Number 2, demographically, we are stagnated, so we are getting fewer compared to the rest of the world. Third, we run an energy crisis. We are not energy, we run a crisis of energy security, and you can feel it especially this year. But this was written already, this was felt already a few years ago, where we import much more energy than we are able to produce right now. Fourth, we are about to run a food security crisis because the rest of the world is getting more numerous, more wealthy. They will need more food for themselves. What they will produce, they will stop exporting to the EU, or they will export it in a much higher prices. And we feel this food insecurity also under this crisis of Ukraine and Russia this year. And fifth, maybe the most important, we are missing the global race of artificial intelligence, of new technologies, of the fourth industrial revolution. So you have in East Asia or in the United States an explosion of new technologies, big data learning, free access to, without ethical restraints to new technologies of artificial intelligence, while we are still laggards compared to them. So we might miss a technological century, a new technological century, and this is an existential crisis for Europe altogether. So how to address the crisis? First of all, to come together as a sovereign federation. The book proposes that all 27 member states will become federated entities of a new sovereign state called the European Federation. You can imagine some other better names if you want than this. Maybe this is boring, but never mind. It doesn't matter how you call it. The question is to finally move on, like the United States of America, for instance. This means practically that this European Federation will represent all these 27 member states in the United Nations. It will replace the United Kingdom and France in the Security Council. It will take over the military, even their nuclear arsenal. This federation, of course, will welcome, first of all, inside not only the EU 27 member states, but also the United Kingdom, because of its international clout, the tradition, the common bonds that we have, the two worlds. And of course, because the United Kingdom, don't forget, was the second biggest economy of the European Union when it was part of it. So it's necessary to be back in order to make this federation great again. But of course, it would also welcome all other European countries west from former Soviet Union, meaning whatever is up to the borders of before Ukraine, Russia, and Turkey, for obvious reasons. For the time being, those three countries are not, in my view, ready to join the EU, and I think it's quite premature to start talking about accession of Ukraine, but we can talk about this issue later. So this federation would have, of course, a constitution. I would propose a constitution of a few articles, no more than 70 or 80, easy to be understood by everybody, every citizen. Right now, it will be impossible, even for you, students of European law, to read the treaties on the functioning of the European Union, which sounds more like a manual rather than a real political document. The government will be based on the classic principles of separation of powers that we know since the 18th, 19th century. A central government, I would prefer a president of the European Union who would be elected, however, upon parliamentary elections, supported by two vice presidents. This government will need to enjoy the support of a parliament that will be voted at European level, of course, broken down into districts with a proportional representation. I would propose a unicameral parliament, although under the federalist tradition, the most appropriate choice is a bicameral parliament, meaning a lower house representing the people of Europe and a higher house representing the federated entities, for instance, the 27 member states. You can argue for both options. I would prefer the unicameral parliament, meaning one single chamber, because it will be more functional, I would say more democratic, it will be closer, the members of that parliament will be more accountable to the people. There will be a European judicial system with three levels: the Supreme Court of Justice, then a lower level at a national level, and then regional and local courts. And I would also propose the creation of a kind of a council of governance, meaning a council where civil society, professional organizations, and also national parliaments will be represented. This council would not co-legislate with the government or with the parliament, but it would have the right to veto on areas where the parliament or the government might exceed their constitutional competencies. At this point, we need to clarify that federalism doesn't mean centralization of powers. It means attributing the right powers to the right level. For instance, the book proposes that on issues like common defense, international trade, foreign relations, diplomacy, on all those big issues that we need to address at continental level, at European level, the powers should lie with the central government. But on other issues, which are much closer to the national character, to national societies, there, the competencies should be exercised by the national governments. To give you an example of the UK as a federated part of this federation would, of course, remain its flag, its national language, its national education system, its symbols, its emblems, the king or the queen as ceremonial figure of the nation. Whatever makes people here feel British should remain. We should not alienate people from this big project. Another example could be the national holidays. Another example would be representation, national representation in sport events, and so on and so forth. So, having said that, we will have the institutions of the state, and then you can ask, but why? What is the real added value for the world? And I would say, and I close here the first part of my introduction, Europe should not come together only in order to save itself, to compete with the rest of the world. It would be a good model to federalize globally the whole the global system of governance, to make it rule-based instead of based on force. It could be used as a model for the creation of other federations around the world, and this is already happening. It's not utopic. We have the African Union, which is already established, although it's very problematic for the time being. We have in Southeast Asia ASEAN, which is like the European Economic Community as it used to be 40 years ago, but it is also evolving with more integration. We have Mercosur in Latin America. They are basically free trade zones, but over time, people realize that they cannot base their unions on economy only. They also face common social problems, environmental problems, problems of global competition. So if Europe goes this way, I'm pretty sure that it will be more powerful and more able to project its values and its interests all over the world, and also help also with the United Nations themselves become a kind of international federation, where the Security Council will not be will not be blocked by one single veto or one veto of a single permanent member state, where rules will be adopted on a more consensual base, and where Europe is going to play a central role in this process. I repeat, this is not utopic, it's happening already to a big extent. Big part of our internal legislation is transposition of international rules. In a way, we are already federated globally to some extent, I would say 40–50%. There is a very dense network of international treaties, a very dense network of government, but also non-governmental cooperation. And of course, the new era, the new digital revolution, internet, artificial intelligence is going to make those networks even denser. So I think the ground is fertile to move on with this kind of, I would say, a higher level of governance. It's not utopic. Of course, there are setbacks like Brexit in 2016, like the war this year. But on the other hand, think several amazing aspects of the pandemic. For instance, during the pandemic, for the first time, the European Union borrowed altogether. I'm finishing in 1 minute. Just two examples. Only in the pandemic, for the first time, a great taboo was broken. European Union decided to issue Eurobonds. We borrowed altogether under the same interest rates, 750 billion euros. And at the same time, another taboo was broken to go for a common health policy. As you know, health was traditionally a national competence. Now it's not anymore. We order vaccines all together. I think we managed quite well with their management and distribution. So, and now with the war in Ukraine, another taboo is breaking. Germany is arming again. They are about to borrow 200 billion euros to defend their to develop their defense, and everybody now is talking about a common European defense. I stop here, and of course we can follow up with more remarks during the discussion.
Thank you, Yannis. Thank you very much. Before I ask the panelists to react, I mean, I just have a quick question for yourself, Yannis. And while we talk about unicameral structures and the complexities of how a potential future Europe might look like, what are the benefits for the average man and woman at home? And I think that's a really key point if we ever try to sell this. And I want to sidestep Brexit briefly for this question, but when we look in the future, when we are thinking about what Britain's future relationship will be with Europe, the question will be, to the average person on the street, what's the benefit?
The benefit will be greater efficiency of the use of our resources in all aspects. It's about money. Altogether, we will become maybe the second or third or even the first biggest economy in the world. Instead of having, let's say, 27 social security systems, we will have one single security system. Same with defense. We will save a lot of public money. By saving this public money, we can increase the efficiency of our social policies in health, in education. The book makes a rough estimation that with a budget of 7.75 trillion euros, meaning the GDP of EU27 and the UK together, we could achieve a great deal of policies. For instance, a social, a kind of basic universal income, not income, let's say support of 300 euros per month for every single person in Europe, from cradle to death. That will create a very, very wide and I would say efficient safety net of social protection that would replace a lot of other social benefits, which are allowances, which are very complicated and not needed. The universal basic pension of 700 euros, which of course could be complemented by other pension schemes. A basic health support of 1,000 euros per year for every person in the union. So this is just a very basic example. Much more efficient research on artificial intelligence, much more efficient research on new technologies. The second biggest army in the world. And when we speak about army nowadays, it's not only about the military. It's about high technology applications that also have an effect on civilian life, for peaceful uses. A common, much better attribution of justice, a more efficient judicial system, better prisons. All these things, if we bring them all together, we will close a lot of gaps within the Union, because right now we have huge gaps between, for instance, Germany and Bulgaria, France and Romania. All these things will be smoothened. A lot of talent, a lot of potential of those people who live in, let's say, less developed areas will be finally released and used in the best possible way. So yes, these are just a few of the examples that I could mention as substantial policy changes that we could bring about.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm now going to ask the panel to give their reactions and thoughts and opinions. You can keep it to 4 minutes. Fantastic. And then we'll have just enough time to get a few questions from the audience. And I hope that you've got some fantastic thoughts in your mind. You've got a few minutes to think them up if you like. Roberto, please go ahead and give us the opinion from a PhD student at the University of Exeter.
I try. Okay, I want to focus on the question of having one unicameral or bicameral parliament, which was one of the points that interested me more. In my opinion, we should go for the bicameral parliament and not unicameral, just because the nature of the European Union. European Union is, as you probably know, is a very asymmetrical federation. We got small states like Malta, Cyprus, Luxembourg, and big states like Italy, Germany, and France. So how do we can bring together the big and the small state, which have different level of population, economic wealth, together? If we go for unicameral parliament, we may risk the fact that this state feels dominated by the bigger. And it's difficult to avoid this problem because in a unicameral chamber, this chamber is representing the people. So the seats are divided according to the population. And that makes so that in Italy, Germany, and France, and Spain got the majority of seats. That's inevitable. So we may need to add a second chamber, which will be in the proposal that the Young European Federalists is making for the Conference on the Future of Europe, a sort of European Senate modeled on the American one, which we can give the same representation to compensate this. So we get this situation where one chamber representing the people is giving more representation to the bigger states, whereas the other chamber representing the smaller states. And that they even out a bit, even if this is not totally possible, because this huge difference. For example, if you think about when the United States were created, their states were very similar in terms of population and wealth. So it was easier to do this. Also in Switzerland, the cantons are not different too much from each other. Europe instead is very different. States are completely different on a lot of parameters. Also, this could help in terms of ensuring a good system of check and balances, because two chambers can check themselves. Of course, this came at a cost in terms of efficiency. As you say, the unicameral system is more efficient. But I think that having two chambers does not imply that it should have the same powers. We can have two chambers and we can divide the powers in a way that can work in a more efficient way. Also, another concern with the solution in the book is that, to my opinion, my personal opinion, the Council of Governors seems like a second chamber in this design and function. Because it's true that it's not a co-legislator, but the veto power is a very important power. Having the power to block something is sometimes more useful than having the power to propose something. So that it seems like a second chamber by stealth in the book. So maybe it's better to try to devise a bicameral system which is good balance of powers. And on this, and I finish, we may ask the question not how many chambers we want in our parliament, but if we want to follow the American Swiss model, or we want to follow the German model. Because the American model is about separation of power, compound republic. We got two chambers with the same powers checking each other out. Instead, if we follow the German model, we got a strong chamber representing the people, and a more weaker chamber representing the state, but still with great power in terms of budget and the most important competences of the state. I think that is a real question that, as a promoter of European Federation, we should try to answer. We want to be like Germany and Switzerland, or we want to be like the United States or Switzerland, or we want to be like Germany or the Federation in mainland Europe.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's an interesting sort of proposal. Which model do we want to follow? And of course, there's plenty more models out there rather than just the Swiss and German model. Don't forget the House of Lords in the UK is something completely different altogether. And while perhaps not perfect, it certainly presents a different approach. So this is where I'll head over to Dirk Hazen, the Federal Trust, and please give us your thoughts.
Thank you. I'll rattle through three quick points on Federal Union, the UK and the EU. The Federal Union was founded in November 1938 in the shadow of Munich. And like Yannis, it had a vision. Its vision was for Federal Union in a free Europe, 1938. In the event, Federal Union became essential for supporting UK joining the European communities as it then was. And I suspect we're going to have to rise again to the challenge. So that's Federal Union. The United Kingdom today suffers from having had its revolution in the 17th rather than 18th century. But at long last, Johnson's constitutional vandalism and undisclosed coup d'etat has proved beyond doubt that we now need a modern written constitution to be fit for purpose as a modern democracy. We want a British Parliament, not mostly unelected, as you hinted, but fully elected on models consistent with voters' preferences. And we want the federal settlement Winston Churchill supported, can you believe it, 110 years ago, for Scotland, Wales and Ireland, and significantly for English regions. Because more than anywhere else in the UK, it's England, home to 85% of Britain's population, that now needs liberating from central government. The whole of the UK needs a stable constitutional framework where local services are provided and funded much more locally, because it's implicit in what you said. But if people, whether on the left or on the right, have more power over the local services they mostly experience, they will be much more receptive to Yannis's vision. Now, turning briefly to the EU. In the early 1980s, I know it's ancient history, but it gives me a perspective. I wrote what became the route map for Europe's single market programme, which Margaret Thatcher was then persuaded to support, and I could write a book about that. One of my core proposals was qualified majority voting in the Council of Ministers for single market initiatives. And QMV has, of course, since been expanded. But combined with direct elections to the European Parliament in 1979, it was a substantial and sustainable step towards federation. But I offer a word of caution. Federal vision, if it's going to have public support, needs words and deeds to match. In the early 1990s, it's just one example, I led the private sector's efforts to secure a European capital market. Now, some of you, I don't think, were even born. But anyone who then said 30 years ago, we would still not have a European capital market by the third decade of the 21st century would have been labelled insanely pessimistic. Today, and forgive this, the yield on Greek government 10-year bonds is still 7.5 times higher than the yield on similar German government bonds. So even money's talking, and money is telling us that for Yannis's vision to become a sustainable reality, your generation, please, must do much better than mine in securing both bottom-up and top-down political rejuvenation across Europe. Because again, better delivery of local public services and wider appreciation of benefit in your macro EU project are frankly inseparable twins.
Thank you, Dirk. Thank you, Dirk. It's very appreciated. Very appreciated. Actually, you pick on a very important point there.
What, just one?
Many points, Dirk, as always. But the one I want to highlight is the local aspect. If you're ever going to win the public over, you have to show them that if they have more control over their local services, left wing, right wing, up wing, down wing, I don't care, they will have a much greater interest in the vision that we all share. And if we can achieve that, that would be great. So. Young generation with me, let's try and do something a bit better than the previous lot. Finally, the final reaction before we go on to open questions to the floor. Lea.
Yeah, when you started talking, you said something else quite interesting, that you started thinking about this book about 10 years ago with the Greek crisis, and that made me realize, I'm gonna make an assumption here and say most of us grew up with the EU already in place. So most of us here never knew anything else, and none of us really ever thought about, it not working because we never knew anything else. Same with, I'm German. I never knew any chancellor other than Angela Merkel until about a few months ago. And then I feel like every single one of us had this moment of, hold on a second, I don't think this is quite working. There's something missing. For me, it was 2015, the refugee crisis. Germany took in a lot of refugees, and especially in my hometown, it was chaos. We were just under 100,000 inhabitants, and at some point, the mayor got a call. It's like, there's a group of 500 refugees coming tomorrow. Figure it out. And
same now with Ukraine.
Exactly. Same now with Ukraine. It's kind of repeating itself. And I think that was the point for me where I was like, well, hold on a second, we need this. This shouldn't be a city level issue. This shouldn't be a federal state level issue in the terms of German federal states. This shouldn't be a national issue. Like this is a lot bigger. This should be a European issue. And I think that's where, for me, the whole thing, that I think immigration policy for me is a big thing for a European federation. And then when it comes to healthcare, you made another point, which I don't totally agree with that during COVID, we actually agreed on house policy. I just spoke to my parents a couple of days ago, and Germany is now doing this weird thing where it's like, well, we got a national approach, but also if there is local hotspots, the local hotspots figure it out. So I think that for me is another really strong argument. It's like, those are Europe-wide global crises that we have to respond to, and we're just letting a bunch of local chapters decide what they want to do. And let's be real, it doesn't work well. And I don't think it is going to work well with coming crisis. I mean, technology is a huge topic. There's so much development going on there. And I mean, the law is behind as it is, and it's always going to be behind because technology develops so rapidly. And I think most of what we think is not, especially when it comes to AI, most of what we think is not going to be possible for another 10 years is happening. It's happening right now. A funny story that I was famous law is my boyfriend got an electric scooter, which in Scotland is outlawed by the same law that allows or that banned horse carriages from being on the street. Same law. Just kind of wrapping out my thoughts here, those three topics, technology, healthcare, and immigration, for me, were really strong arguments from what you said towards the European Federation. Yeah, I realised I ran out of time at one point, but I'm sure we can get your votes.
We can get back to some of the questions. Thank you very much, Lea. Thank you very much. So the questions open to the floor. If you have some questions for the panelists, that'd be absolutely fantastic to hear some. And we had a couple submitted before the event, just in case. We've got loads of hands already. It's fine, don't worry. Right. Okay. We'll go for the back first.
Hi. This is generally for the panel in general. I guess my question is, what impact do you think the Ukraine crisis is going to have on the European Union in general, and how it can maybe accelerate this process? Because I think it has certainly awoken a sense of values and feelings that maybe weren't people didn't necessarily feel attached to. And going back as well, a sort of follow-on question really is, one of the things I think we learned from Brexit is it's all right to talk about what benefits you do for local people and how it can help local, organisations and stuff, but you still need that emotional connection. And actually that was missing a lot in Brexit, particularly on the Remain side. It was all facts and figures, but yet still people voted to leave because there was none of that emotional attachment. So how can we, in order to persuade people that this is the right thing to do, say emotionally this is also something that is in your interest? And I was just wondering, again, linking with Ukraine and on a general note.
Yeah, no, of course, Ukraine is definitely going to come up in the questions.
Can I answer directly?
Absolutely, go ahead, Yannis. No, please.
On the Ukrainian crisis, first of all, we should all be grateful to Vladimir Putin, because he was really our wake-up call, at least in Europe. And now we finally start realizing a lot of things. The obvious effect of the Ukrainian, I wouldn't say crisis, it's a crime actually, is that Europe will finally start developing its common defense forces. On this, I'm pretty definite. Since Germany made the first move, France, of course, will follow, but also smaller states like mine, like Greece, they are very keen on this because we feel more vulnerable towards Turkey. But there will be other impacts. Definitely, we will move on with a common energy policy. We will increase our energy sufficiency. We will become more self-sufficient. That's for sure. We will definitely invest more on hydrogen and the renewables. We will establish stronger partnerships with Norway. Norway will increase its provisionally its exports of natural gas, Algeria as well. We might explore common projects in East Mediterranean for the same reason. On food security also, we will start developing our new policies, examining how to become more food sufficient. A lot of things came upside down during the ongoing Ukrainian crisis, and this is the only optimism that I derive from this event, that Europe definitely will transform itself. A lot of taboos will break. On the second issue, that we are full of facts and figures, let's say good projects, talking about efficiency, but little emotions. In the book, in chapter 6, I also propose some ideas how to develop a kind of European identity, which will be parallel to national identities, how to bring people closer to the European idea. Let's not fool ourselves. People are not in love with Europe. They see it as a convenient way to move on. And let it be like this. We don't speak the same languages. A lot of things, we have major cultural and linguistic barriers, for instance. But on the other hand, we already have a kind of identity, a key, an identity, let's say, achievement in all EU member states. You can see the European flags next to the national flags. Nobody is offended. To the contrary, people feel reassured, feel happy to be part of this family, which is symbolized by this flag. We are happy with Eurovision. We are happy with the European football tournaments, with the Champions League. We are happy with many things which are European and also part of our daily lives. Eurosport, Euronews. We have achievements like the CERN in this Nuclear Research Institute in Switzerland, which is a very European project. Space programs, many, many examples. So nobody's really super excited about them. On the other hand, everybody's happy to participate. So let's be modest and develop these feelings, these emotions over time. The more successes we have, let's say, the deeper the connections between the people and this federation might become. Or if not the federation, the European Union. Call it whatever. Let's not use federation as the key word. I attended a meeting in Brussels with Guy Verhofstadt. I guess most of you know him. He said, I don't care to be called federalist. I just want a deeper union that works, that brings us all together. Call it whatever. I don't know.
Thank you. Yeah. Just before I come to you, Doug, I think there's an interesting part of Ukraine is how that's affected the UK and perhaps the European feeling in the UK. I think that raises a very interesting point. But Doug, please.
Well, yes, just pursuing that very briefly, I think it's fascinating the way that these Conservative Party members of Parliament are getting on the hind legs in the House of Commons and saying how disgusting Mr. Putin's been. But I doubt very much if more than one other person in this room at most would know that in 2009, David Cameron took his party, the Conservative Party, into formal alliance in the Parliamentary Assembly to the Council of Europe with Putin's party. And that alliance only ended 6 weeks after the invasion of the Crimea. I mean, I think actually, I don't agree with everything you said on defence, to be quite honest. I think there are only two serious European countries on defence at the moment, and they are France and the United Kingdom. I don't think Germany can be accused of leading on anything on defence. Let's just see what they do. But I think they will deliver. What I think is interesting on Ukraine is it does look to me, picking up on things I've heard in the last few days, it does look to me like Sweden and Finland are both serious about joining NATO as soon as possible. And I think that is good news because we have got to strengthen the Western alliance in the Baltic. You're absolutely right about Brexit and emotion. The only intervention I remember on our side in the referendum was Sheila Hancock's. It's the only one that was actually any good. I mean, Ruth Davidson was a bit good, but only Sheila Hancock. And the trouble was, our side was sabotaged. Cameron deliberately chose to have that referendum at the most difficult time in politics that you were talking about, in 2015, with 1 million refugees in Germany. That was a deliberate thing to hold the Conservative Party together, not for the country's best interest. And we could have had an emotional campaign, but that David Cameron insisted on leading it. And God, he made a mess of it. And he was going round all the European governments, typical David Cameron, I got it in the bag, it's going to be 60% majority. And I was going around, the EPP ones, which I know best, saying, no, it very much depends on the day whether it's the economy or migration that runs it. So you're absolutely right. You can't get there without the emotion, but your generation, I truly believe, has the emotion, actually, as did mine when I was your age. I think you've got a lead on the emotion, I think, your generation.
Thank you very much. Before we move away from Ukraine, very, very briefly, I will just ask Lea to give a quick opinion, and we'll move on out of Ukraine, because I feel that there's quite a lot of other issues coming up. Very, very quickly, Germany's reaction to Ukraine. Are we seeing a rebirth of German defence? Is it going to leave Europe, or are you on the side of Dirk and believe that perhaps France and Britain are the defence?
Well, they have been. It's the future.
Yeah, they have been. I saw a joke on the internet, which was, just to make this clear, you want Germany to get military really strong, march through Poland and attack Russia, just so we're very clear. And it does sort of feel like it, where over years, I mean, Germany has a very weird relationship with national identity, as in, you know, in the UK you say I'm proud to be British. In Germany you don't say that. It's a very weird dynamic. So I think in our generation we've just never thought about arming up. We just never thought about there would be a time again where Germany was like, okay, we're going to spend this much money on defense. I mean, frankly, up until that decision, our military was laughable. I mean, they at some point ordered attack helicopters for the Navy that rusted when they flew over water. So I think it's going to be interesting, because I don't actually think we got any ministers in Germany that have any military expertise or capabilities or any in-depth knowledge. So I think it's going to be interesting. A lot of people are very frustrated with it, because the health sector, you know, it took them many months after Corona to agree on a 1 billion care package. Here you go, good, like this is the most we can do. And the second the war breaks, I was like, well, you know, 100 billion, here you go.
It's an interesting.
Thanks.
it's certainly an interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
Right. So let's have some more questions on the floor. Nothing about Ukraine, please. Because of the number of questions, we'll take two at a time. We'll go for yourself.
Thank you. I agree with the idea of the European Federation to be like very powerful, but I was wondering if what could be the response of the international community could be, like if it could be possible or not, like if they could maybe cancel some agreements to try not to have all the European countries together, or what would be the answer of the international community?
Thank you. And we'll take one more. We'll go for the front.
Okay. Hello. So you can identified like 5 challenges that you think a federation would address. And of these, I'm interested in energy security, because I'm quite boring and I only ever talk about energy. But what is it you think what is it you think would enable a European Federation to address energy security challenges that wouldn't be able to be addressed otherwise?
Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll start with Roberto and answer what you like.
I go back. I'm not very expert on energy, so I'll pass this on. I go to the international community response. Depends on the standing of the European Union. Of course, if we create a powerful European Union and we stand with the United States as we are now, that will be seen by probably China and Russia as a direct challenge and could lead to another bipolarism. So if the European Union become powerful, she probably should act as a leveling up between the United States on the one side and China on the other side. If not, it can lead to another Cold War, because China will see this as a challenge. Because United States plus European Union together will be overwhelming comparing the two. Now, with the current economical data and power, they should be with more power than the others, so that could lead to could be seen as a challenge. If the European Union instead stay in the middle, compensating could stabilize the multipolar world in which we are going to live, because there is not what we call the unipolar moment of the United States after the Cold War is now ending. And this challenge we see now, invasion of Ukraine, the withdrawal from Afghanistan is the rise of China. So we have more powers, powers that try to dominate the international arena. So if the European Union got together, it should, in my opinion, try to stay not too on one side or the other side, but try to pacify the system, stabilize it, avoiding the escalation. And that could be his role in the system, not as use his power to wield war, but use his power to stabilize, to create peace, as it was a target, the aim and the goal of the European Union. That is possible. If instead is going to clearly to match with the United States that is now, it could be possible seen as a challenge. It could lead to a Cold War scenario. That's my take. Maybe I'm wrong, but my opinion.
Yeah, great. Another Cold War, fantastic. I didn't live through the first, but
Let's topic is cold.
definitely. Yannis, would you like to sort of pitch in on the energy side?
On the energy side, I think European Federation will better address the issues of energy security because we will have more resources to integrate our systems. A denser, let's say, supranational pipeline system, for instance, not for natural gas only, also for hydrogen, just an example. Better allocation of resources to develop greener energy also in left behind areas of the Union, which is now not very easy to do because we are still talking about 27 member states, some of them poor, some of them little developed. It will all come together. We can put our resources together for more solar energy, more wind energy, better distribution of the production, of energy production through more efficient grids around the continent. I think for this we need a sovereign state. And also, through a European Federation, we will negotiate better, for instance, with countries in North Africa, in Sahara, about the creation of common solar energy projects. Just a small example. Or we can also negotiate more powerfully energy deals with the Gulf states or with other continents that would produce green energy. I'm tempted also to answer to the question about international cooperation. For sure, some international players will see a European Federation as an antagonist, as a new competitor, but also as a new collaborator. Again, right now, geopolitically, the global balance, I think we have a black hole in the middle of Europe, is we don't have a European geopolitical power. This is very unnatural. Again, we are the second biggest economy in the world, the third biggest population in the world, and still no geopolitical power, or very little. This doesn't fit well with the global system of security. So in times of crisis, other competitors, geopolitical competitors like India, China, even a future Russia or United States, would trust more a strong Europe that could be a balancing power among competitors. On the top of it, they will trust a European Federation as a more reliable trade partner. Already now, China is happy to have a European Union to deal with because it's an integrated market. For China or for India or for Americans, I mean, Americans through the Marshall Plan in the 40s and 50s, they themselves helped with the development of the European Economic Union because they wanted an integrated market to deal better, to absorb better their products. So yes, I'm optimistic that the rest of the world will welcome the creation of a sovereign European Federation as a, let's say, more reliable collaborator, but also competitor, that's for sure.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time, so I'll just take two more. Well, we've got a few more questions. I'll just take another two questions to start. We'll go for over here. We'll go back.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about unifying resources like fiscal policy, healthcare policy. Certainly for people in my family who voted Brexit, it was things like that contributed to the idea that we would lose control with this ever closer union. So how would we take away from that idea, especially when you talk about losing our personal seat on the Security Council and replacing it with the EU in charge? How would you sell that to people and stop this impression occurring that you're taking away control from the UK?
And I'll take you had a hand?
Yeah. it sort of bounces on that idea as well, but it discusses a lot about the governance issues, but any sorts of federalist implementation must come from the citizen level as well, from the bottom up, not from just top down, from the academics and the political governments. We have seen that federalism has already been trying to be implemented in the EU with the constitutional treaty, which was sadly rejected by the Dutch and the French population in 2005. Seeing that the EU has gone through so many crises just in the last decade since those referendums were held, do you see that, especially from the ground up, there is still support or hope in terms of achieving federalism from the citizens' perspective?
Thank you. Doug, I think probably for the financial aspect, that's quite an interesting one. Maybe you can pitch on.
Well, I don't agree with you on unifying fiscal policy, certainly anything like the current level of evolution of the EU. And I also don't agree with the direct comparisons with the United States of America. The federal budget in the United States is 30% of GDP. We've had all this performance in this country and in others about the 1% of GDP that is the European Union budget. So we've really got some way to go, and I think some things are better understated in terms of words and overperformance in terms of deeds. And I think on things like taxes, obviously you align things like company law, and VAT has been aligned for many years. But actually, one of the main problems of the European Union at the moment is competitiveness. And frankly, with the state, you can tell I'm coming from the centre right now, with the state taking 50% of GDP pretty much across the European Union and competing with other parts of the planet where it's far less, let's concentrate on our soft power and projecting our soft power. Get the defence up, of course, but we're leading on environmental standards. We certainly lead the world in culture. I mean, we lead in so many ways, and we are trusted as a community of law. But without that little thing that the United States have got, which is extraterritorial everything, if you sort of put a foot in the United States, or even if you don't. So, we're trusted. Let's look at the soft power. And I agree with you. I mean, to come to London, sir, and say the United Kingdom's got to give up to Brussels its seat on the Security Council, actually, that is not under the message that's going to sell in Peoria. Honestly, it isn't. Not here. Not yet. I mean, let's get us back in first. I think that's one. Yes.
Yannis, I think you might want to come back on that. But just before you do, it's a really interesting point, because I have been involved in rejoin campaigns, and I would never go to someone saying we should rejoin the EU because we like the European Federation. I would never do that, and we shouldn't do that, in my opinion. But it's not about my opinion; it's about Yannis's and the rest of the panel. So.
Well, any kind of...
Sorry about that.
I want to go...
Step by step.
Exactly. So in order to go step by step, I want to go, let's say, 60 years ago and see where we were at that time and how much power since then national governments have, not only governments, people themselves, they have accepted to give up national sovereignty in favor of European, let's say, supranational sovereignty. And this has been an amazing course of events, an amazing development. We were a European economic community of 6 member states, or let's say 12 until 1985. Now we are a European Union of 27 member states. Not only an internal market, but common currency, common space, no passports. This is, from a historic perspective, an amazing development. At the same time, parts of the Soviet Union have now become parts of the European Union. That would sound crazy if somebody predicted something like this in the 80s, only 40 years ago. So I don't see it giving this development, this historic development, and taking into account this acceleration of history, I don't think it's such an unbelievable development if two member states give up their Security Council positions.
Yeah, but you haven't got one.
True, but
Let's abolish the Security Council.
let's admit, yes, first of all, the Security Council is completely outdated. The Security Council right now reflects the situation right after World War II. You don't have India there as a permanent member, and you have France. Why? It's completely. You don't have Latin America.
You don't have Germany. France is there.
Yeah, okay, France instead of Germany. But these are very outdated institutions. It's almost irrelevant nowadays. It cannot reach any decision because it's subject to the Russian and Chinese veto. So let's not have a static vision that that's it. Because of the Second World War, Germany should not have an army anymore, and India or China or Japan should not join or Japan or somebody else should not join the Security Council. I think we should look forward. We are in the 21st century, and perceptions change much faster than we think. This is why I'm optimistic. I dare to make this proposal in the book. I agree that it's not realistic to achieve something like this within 5 years. But I would not exclude that during your lifetime, because you are much younger than us, you will see the whole world turning upside down. Let's be ready for this. We are not anymore in 1945 or 1955. We are close to 2045. So this is why I want it.
Thank you. So I'm just going to ask Lea for her reaction on the idea of winning people over, but after that, we've only got time for one more question, so I'll ask everyone to be brief. If you'd like
Yeah, it's just something you said, again, a joke from the internet, is I think our generation has by now lived through 3 once-in-a-lifetime crises, and I think there's going to be more coming. So, but no, definitely very interesting topic on, the citizens, like from the bottom up. I was in a pub yesterday, and I was talking to a European politics student. I was like, for the panel today, I got to prepare, so I went to him and was like, opinion on European Federation, go. And he started talking about good idea, that's what you have to do. And then the most important point that he made is we need to get away from the focus on the nations and get to the citizens. How do we convince citizens that this is a good idea? And I read something quite interesting today that was, if you ask an American, and already kind of saying, where you're from, and they would be like, oh, I'm American from New Jersey, I'm an American from, and so on and so on. If you ask a European, where are you from, the answer is never necessarily going to be, I'm a European from Germany, or I'm a European from France. So to introduce this idea of the European Federation, we kind of need to change the perception of what it is, and we need to change the, not necessarily, we don't need to change any national identity, but kind of the attitude towards the EU, and what is perceived not just as a convenient travel thing, or oh yeah, I can go to France and I don't have to exchange any money, but that it is actually this union that spans so many more policies that we can potentially imagine, that has so many more benefits than we could potentially imagine right now. So we kind of need to get to a point where people recognize and are proud to say, yes, I am, I'm a European from Germany.
Yeah, very, very much indeed. Right, so time for one more question. Very, very brief, please. Off you go.
It's about social policies, because when you introduce your 5 pillars that should be existential to the Federal Union, I've had the question in my mind, where do you see the social politics in this vision that you shared with us? In my opinion, if you have a common economic system, you also need a common social system, and I also think that this could get people more affiliated with the European Union and think more positively about it when they see direct benefits on the ground. So I would like to know, where would you put the social policies in your vision?
Thank you. Right, Alice, please be short. We are slightly over time, so.
I agree. I think social policy is fundamental for every kind of state, especially nowadays. European Union is kind of weird because it's built as the welfare state does not exist in its European Union. Was born as an economic project, but the social part never followed because social policy is very silent. It's the most important policy that a state and political parties could wield to gain support. So it will remain as a member state because member states want to control the social policy because it's through welfare, through benefits that you gain votes and consensus in your internal chain. But without a social policy, you cannot have an economic union or a fiscal union because you need to feel the people together also in protection. And you cannot, if you have different system, you end up people paying more, paying less. So the problem between the northern state and the southern state because you spend too much. We pay too much and you spend. If you have a common social policy, that could not be used as an argument. Because we decide together how we gain money and how we spend money. So it could be necessary.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Thank you very
I
much.
have 1 minute on this because
You can, but I'll give you the last final word. Yeah,
Okay.
It seems most reasonable to give you the final word. As this is the last question, I'll let everyone have a word. So Dirk, Lea, then yourself, Yannis.
Right. Well, I'd actually like to pick up on something you said as part of an answer. I think the European Union would have done itself more favours in terms of projecting its image if it had tried a bit harder to safeguard the existing rights as European citizens of those in the United Kingdom who wanted to keep them. It isn't really much of a citizenship if it can be removed by one dodgy referendum. So I think it would have been better if some of the earlier promises had been sustained. But you're right, the social programme is very important. It's very much embedded in the two largest historic groups, the Socialists and also the EPP, because it's very different political theory to what passes for conservatism in this country. Social policy is at the essence of Christian democracy as well as of socialism. So it is built in, actually, to the fabric of the European Union. And one very important part of it, frankly, with enlargement, was securing the freedom of the four freedoms, the freedom of mobility of labour, because actually that is very life-enhancing to somebody that comes from a high unemployment, low-income part of the European Union. And we have not developed that in the same way as the United States have, and that should be more developed despite all the problems that have been in this particular country. So I think the four freedoms, getting minimum standards, although I don't agree with all your prescriptiveness, sir, but I think getting agreed minimum standards and a very clear common understanding of what it is to be a European citizen, and not removing that citizenship just because there's one dodgy local vote. I mean, do you think if there'd been some dodgy referendum in Texas, the United States would have taken American citizenship from all Texans? No, they wouldn't. So why should those of us Brits here who want to keep most of those rights, and if necessary pay, because there is a payment, why shouldn't we have been allowed to keep it? And that is, there is a social dimension to that too, but it's probably not what you meant.
Well, as a Brit, I certainly would like to retain my European citizenship. So I have to agree with that quite a lot. And also, you are right. I mean, the freedom of movement is something we've lost, and it's quite awful in the UK. And no longer can I just hop along to Brussels for 6 months.
Yes, it's an answer to the question. It is a very clear answer to the question. It is part of the social
Absolutely,
program.
yeah, absolutely. And you know that the fact that people who are in a difficult situation who can't find employment can't jump across the channel in the UK or across the border in continental Europe is absolutely it's detrimental.
And I know you're running behind the time, but with that goes mutual recognition of benefits and all that sort of thing.
Of course. All right, Lea, and then Yannis.
Yeah, I'm not I'm not particularly going to answer the question, I'm sorry, because I think if I get into a rant now, we're not going to be done for another 20 minutes. Citizenship is definitely a very interesting one. Freedom of movement is a very interesting one. My parents had to get passports made to get to my graduation, and they were not happy about it. So just to go to one event in the UK, they had to go through like a whole 4, 5, 6 week process, pay the money to now they have a passport lying around, but we're doing anything with it. But the EU, just kind of as closing words, the EU is an interesting project, and I think there's so much more to come in the years and so many more crises that we're gonna face, which are gonna inform how federal Europe, or however you want to call it, United States of Europe, Supreme Europe, so that was funny, but there's going to be a lot more that's going to inform how that potentially look like, and I'm actually, to be honest, I'm quite excited to see it. It's going to be horrible for some parts, but I think we've got quite exciting times ahead.
Thank you very much. And final words, Yannis, please.
Social security, social policy is the most expensive item in every budget. And it took me 30% of my time to write a chapter on social policies for federal Europe. It was a nightmare for me to get through figures and to figure out what budget items what amount should be allocated to what budget item. I will give you in bullet points some proposals. Of course, it's a separate discussion. We can discuss it for 3 hours, whether it's feasible or not. I believe that with the current resources of GDP, we put everything together. We could allocate, again, 300 euros per month for everybody alive, every citizen. It's not a basic income, it's, I would say, a basic support that would replace a lot of other allowances like unemployment, or allowances for widows, or allowances for, let's say, poverty, housing, and so on. 700 euros a basic pension for everybody. 1,000 euros for primary health care expenses per year for everybody. A very robust policy to receive 2 million immigrants every year in the entire federation. A generous policy to boost demography. So altogether, to jump from 500 to 600 million people by the end of the century, at least to start catching up with the development of the rest of the world. A robust policy to bridge gaps of social inequality by municipal projects, regional projects, and so on. I think also robust health policy in all other areas apart from a basic support. A common policy on education, on to increase our educational standards. All these things together could create a quite wide safety net, which might be a bit unfair, I agree, because if you allocate the same amount to everybody, there is a sense of fairness. It's not really targeted. On the other hand, the system will become much simpler, much more transparent, less bureaucratic. Nobody will become destitute. Nobody will be left on the streets. In theory, we should not have homeless people anymore. It sounds a bit socialist or social democratic, but not really. I'm a liberal. I believe that we need to allocate all these basic amounts in order to liberate the rest of the budget for more productive investments. I try to prove it through figures in the book. So this is an advertisement for the book. You're welcome to order it, buy it, and read more details. And I'm concluding with this.
Thank you very much, Yannis. Thank you very much. A round of applause for the panelists.